The purpose of this presentation is to talk about an important concept called a production possibilities frontier. We're going to be using the PPF to discuss trade and why trade is good. We're going to show that trade can give citizens more wealth than they could if they didn't trade with other countries, and the PPF curve will be quite useful in that endeavor. A quick definition of what the PPF is: it is a frontier, production possibilities frontier, so possibilities you can produce, the frontier meaning the maximum combination of goods a nation can produce. And that probably doesn't mean much. It's much easier to see in an example. Up here you see I have a equation for the US and I have an equation for Cuba. Later we're going to be doing some examples where we say, okay, right now the US doesn't trade with Cuba because of the embargo. What if we did? How would it increase the wealth of both nations if they did so? And you see these are linear equations, and for both equations, beer is on the left-hand side and it's also on the y-axis of the graph. Sugar is on the right-hand side and it's also on the x-axis of the graph. And I'm just going to go ahead. Most of you who are decent in math can just look at those lines. You know exactly how to plot them. If you're not sure how to plot lines like these, at the end of this video I'll give you a quick demonstration of how to do it, because you will need to do it. If I plot this line for the US, I know that 10 is going to be on the y-axis and the x-axis, and so I just draw a straight line there. And for Cuba, the y-axis is going to be 5 and the x-axis is going to be 10. What we have there, that's a PPF for Cuba, and the blue line was a PPF for the US. And this is how the curves are interpreted. For the US, if the US didn't produce any sugar, if sugar was 0, and it used its resources efficiently, the maximum amount of beer it could produce would be 10. Whereas if Cuba did not produce any sugar, the maximum amount of beer it could produce is 5. So not surprisingly, with a much larger country, the US can produce twice as much beer as Cuba can if the only thing those two countries try to produce is beer. Now for sugar, if the US did not produce any beer, then the maximum amount of sugar it could produce is 10. And if Cuba didn't produce any beer, the maximum amount of sugar it could produce is also 10. And so if both countries concentrate only on producing sugar, they produce the same amount. So they're both equally good at producing sugar. And that's how you interpret the x-axis and the y-axis and x-axis. Y-intercept and x-intercept. Let's look at the US, the blue line, and let's suppose that the US produces only 5 sugar. This means the maximum amount of beer it could produce is 5. And so when US produces 5 sugar, the maximum amount of beer it can get is also 5. This point A, I'm drawing this as point A. Point A is what we call a feasible point. If there was a point B up here I was looking at, where the US still produced the same amount of sugar, 5, but now it was able to get more beer, that's actually impossible. And so we call point B an infeasible point. This is important because we're going to see later that although point A is the maximum amount of beer US can produce if it's producing 5 sugar, the US can actually consume out here. It can get more beer without giving up any sugar if it engages in trade. Likewise, the US will be able to get more sugar without giving up any beer with trade, and to some degree it can get both more of both beer and sugar with trade. To use one more example, if we now look at sugar, if say Cuba is, let's say they're producing 4 beer, then the maximum amount of sugar they can produce is 2. That is production, but when they trade with other countries, they may actually be able to consume out here on a point B. What we're going to see in another video is that while neither the U.S. nor Cuba can produce at point B because it's beyond their PPF curve, and the PPF curve tells us the maximum amount of goods they can produce, it will be possible for them to produce at point A, then trade with each other, and get to point B. So even though it's impossible for them to produce the combination of sugar and beer denoted by point B, with trade, they may be able to. And so the point is, with trade, it's possible for countries to get more beer and sugar without giving up anything. Countries can get something for nothing. That's the end of everything except plotting the blue and the red line. If you have trouble taking these two equations and plotting them like I did here, then watch the rest of this video and I'm going to give you some quick instruction on how to do that, because you will need to do it for my class. First, consider how to plot the PPF curve for the U.S. What I do is, since these are two linear lines and all we need to do is plot 2 points for a linear line and connect them and you have the whole function, what I like to do is to just calculate both the y and the x-intercept and then connect the two, and then you have your PPF. So what I first do is I say, okay, suppose that sugar is equal to 0, then what is beer? Well, then it's pretty straightforward. We know that beer is going to, and notice I made the equation a little shorter by using B for beer and S for sugar. Beer is going to equal 10 minus 1 times S, but S here is 0, and so it equals 10. That gives us our y-intercept of 10. Next, we say, what if beer equals 0? Well, then we have the case where 0 equals 10 minus 1 times S, and we just need to solve for S, and I'll do that by taking this to the other side of the equation. You get rid of the negative, so you have 1 times S equals 10, which means S equals 10, and now we have our x-intercept. And once we have the y-intercept and x-intercept, we just connect them, and we've got our PPF for the U.S. Then we're going to just do the same thing for Cuba. Notice again, I have made the equation a little bit simpler. We need to be careful here to make sure recognize that right here is a 5, right here is a 5, but right there is an S. Well, what I do is get my y-intercept and x-intercept. So first thing I ask right here is, what if S equals 0? What will the value of beer be? Well, use the equation. B equals 5 minus 0.5 S, but S equals 0, and so this gives us 5, and my y-intercept is 5. Next, we ask, what if beer equals 0? So plug in 0 for B equals 5 minus 0.5 S. Bring this to the other side of the equation. Get rid of the negative. 0.5 S equals 5. Divide by 0.5. S equals 5. Divided by 0.5, which equals 10. Now we have our x-intercept, and then we just connect the two. Now, I know some people did not have very good mathematics instruction in high school, so even if that, which I consider to be a really easy example, if you weren't able to follow that, you need more help, please come see us, because you have absolutely got to be able to do some very simple plots like this.